At the center of this tragedy were three individuals whose lives had become inextricably intertwined. Thaddeus Gosling, a 32-year-old local veterinarian with a gentle demeanor and a passion for animal welfare. Genevieve Plumptre, a 28-year-old vivacious elementary school teacher with a zest for life that was infectious to all who knew her. And Cordelia Gosling, Thaddeus's 58-year-old mother, a pillar of the community known for her charitable work and impeccable taste. No one could have predicted the dark turn of events that would unfold, forever changing the lives of these three individuals and the entire town of Marin. Thaddeus Gosling grew up as the only child of Cordelia and the late Edmund Gosling. From an early age, it was clear that Thaddeus had inherited his father's kind heart and his mother's sharp intellect. Cordelia, widowed when Thaddeus was just 10, poured all her energy into raising her son to be the perfect gentleman. She micromanaged every aspect of his life, from his studies to his social circle, always pushing him to excel and meet her exacting standards. As Thaddeus grew older, he found solace in the company of animals. This passion led him to pursue veterinary medicine, much to Cordelia's initial dismay. She had hoped he would follow in his father's footsteps and become a surgeon. However, seeing her son's dedication and success in his chosen field eventually softened her stance. Throughout his life, Thaddeus had always sought his mother's approval. Their relationship was complex, marked by Cordelia's overbearing love and Thaddeus's desire for independence. He often found himself torn between his own desires and his mother's expectations, a conflict that would come to a head in the most tragic of ways. Genevieve Plumptre, on the other hand, had a very different upbringing. Born to loving, working-class parents in a neighboring town, Genevieve had always been a larger girl. Her childhood was marked by cruel taunts from classmates and well-meaning but hurtful comments from relatives about her weight. Despite these challenges, Genevieve's parents instilled in her a strong sense of self-worth and a determination to pursue her dreams. As she grew older, Genevieve channeled her experiences into a passion for education and child psychology. She believed that by becoming a teacher, she could make a difference in children's lives, fostering acceptance and kindness in the next generation. Her warm personality and innovative teaching methods quickly made her a favorite among students and parents alike. When she started teaching at Marin Elementary, Thaddeus and Genevieve's paths crossed on a rainy Tuesday afternoon at the Marin Animal Shelter. Genevieve had brought her class for a field trip to learn about animal care and adoption. Thaddeus, who volunteered at the shelter in his spare time, was instantly captivated by Genevieve's enthusiasm and the way she engaged with the children and animals. Their connection was immediate and powerful. Thaddeus was drawn to Genevieve's confidence and zest for life, while Genevieve found herself charmed by Thaddeus's gentle nature and quick wit. They began dating soon after, their relationship blossoming quickly as they discovered a deep compatibility and shared values. For the first time in his life, Thaddeus felt truly seen and accepted for who he was, not who someone else wanted him to be. Genevieve, in turn, found in Thaddeus a partner who appreciated her for her mind and spirit, never once making her feel insecure about her appearance. Their love story seemed like a fairy tale come to life in the small town of Marin. But little did they know that their happiness would soon be put to the ultimate test. After a whirlwind romance that lasted just over a year, Thaddeus decided to propose to Genevieve. He planned an elaborate surprise, enlisting the help of Genevieve's students to create a scavenger hunt that led her through their favorite spots in Marin, ending at the animal shelter where they first met. There, surrounded by wagging tails and purring cats, Thaddeus got down on one knee and asked Genevieve to be his wife. Overjoyed, Genevieve accepted without hesitation. The couple's happiness was palpable as they shared the news with friends and colleagues. The town buzzed with excitement, many seeing their union as a perfect match. However, one crucial person had yet to be informed: Cordelia Gosling. Thaddeus, knowing his mother's tendency to be judgmental, had been hesitant to introduce Genevieve to her. He had mentioned Genevieve in passing, but had never brought her home or shared details about their relationship. Now, with an engagement ring on Genevieve's finger, he knew he could no longer avoid the inevitable meeting. The couple arrived at the Gosling family home, a stately Victorian mansion that had been in the family for generations. Cordelia greeted them at the door, her smile faltering as her gaze fell upon Genevieve. The air grew thick with tension as they sat in the formal living room, Cordelia's eyes darting between her son and his fiancée. When Thaddeus announced their engagement, the room fell silent. Cordelia's face went through a range of emotions: shock, disbelief, and finally poorly concealed disgust. Her voice was cold as she asked how long they had known each other, her disapproval evident in every clipped word. Genevieve, ever the optimist, tried to bridge the gap, complimenting the house and asking about family heirlooms, but Cordelia's responses were curt, her eyes never quite meeting Genevieve's. As the uncomfortable visit drew to a close, Cordelia pulled Thaddeus aside, her whispered words carrying an edge of desperation. She couldn't understand how her son, her perfect boy, could choose someone so different. Thaddeus left his childhood home that day with a heavy heart, torn between his love for Genevieve and his desire for his mother's approval. Little did he know that this was just the beginning of a conflict that would escalate beyond his wildest nightmares. In the weeks following the announcement, Thaddeus and Genevieve threw themselves into wedding planning. They envisioned a celebration that would blend their personalities, a rustic yet elegant affair to be held at the local botanical gardens. Genevieve's enthusiasm was infectious as she pored over bridal magazines and Pinterest boards, while Thaddeus found himself caught up in her joy. However, Cordelia's disapproval cast a long shadow over their happiness. She began a campaign of subtle sabotage, questioning every decision and suggesting alternatives that invariably excluded Genevieve's input. When Genevieve chose a flowing bohemian-style wedding dress that made her feel beautiful, Cordelia pushed for a more traditional, slimming gown. When the couple decided on a menu featuring comfort foods they both loved, Cordelia insisted on a healthier selection. Each interaction left Genevieve feeling more insecure and Thaddeus increasingly frustrated. Arguments between mother and son became frequent, often ending with Cordelia in tears, lamenting how Thaddeus had changed and no longer cared about her opinions. One particularly heated exchange occurred during a cake tasting session. As Genevieve savored a piece of rich chocolate cake, her eyes lighting up with pleasure, Cordelia muttered under her breath, "Are you sure you need that, dear?" The comment, though quiet, didn't escape Genevieve's ears. Thaddeus, seeing the hurt in his fiancée's eyes, finally snapped. "Mother, that's enough!" he exclaimed, his voice echoing in the small bakery. "Your behavior is unacceptable. If you can't be supportive, then perhaps you shouldn't be involved in the wedding planning at all." Cordelia's face paled, her lips pressing into a thin line. Without a word, she gathered her things and stormed out of the bakery, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. That night, Thaddeus received a barrage of messages from his mother, alternating between guilt-tripping him for his outburst and expressing concern about his choice of bride. She questioned whether he was truly happy, suggesting that perhaps he felt obligated to marry Genevieve out of pity or a misplaced sense of political correctness. Thaddeus, conflicted and emotionally drained, confided in Genevieve about his mother's messages. Genevieve, despite her own hurt, showed remarkable compassion. She suggested that perhaps they should make more of an effort to include Cordelia, to show her that their love was real, and that there was room in their lives for all of them. Taking Genevieve's advice to heart, Thaddeus attempted to extend an olive branch to his mother. He invited her to join them for dinner, hoping that in a more intimate setting, Cordelia might see the depth of their connection. The dinner, however, was a disaster. Cordelia spent the evening making backhanded compliments and pointed remarks about health and appearance, each comment chipping away at Genevieve's self-esteem and Thaddeus's patience. As the wedding day drew nearer, the tension continued to escalate. Cordelia's behavior became increasingly erratic. She began showing up unannounced at Thaddeus's veterinary practice, pleading with him to reconsider the marriage. She even went so far as to reach out to Thaddeus's ex-girlfriends, hoping to rekindle old flames and drive a wedge between the engaged couple. Thaddeus, torn between his love for Genevieve and his lifelong desire to please his mother, found himself in an impossible position. He loved Genevieve with all his heart, but the prospect of cutting ties with his only remaining parent was unbearable. As the conflict reached a fever pitch, none of them could have anticipated the tragic turn of events that lay just around the corner. As the wedding date approached, Cordelia Gosling's behavior took a dark turn. What had begun as disapproval and passive-aggressive comments evolved into a full-blown obsession with preventing the marriage at any cost. She convinced herself that she was acting out of love for her son, protecting him from making a grave mistake that would ruin his life. Cordelia's days became consumed with researching ways to sabotage the wedding. She spent hours online, delving into forums and websites that promoted extreme dieting and fat shaming. Her browser history filled with searches for how to break up a couple and signs your son is in an abusive relationship. She even consulted a local psychic, desperate for any sign that the marriage was doomed. Her fixation on Genevieve's weight led her down a dangerous path. Cordelia began to view Genevieve not as a person, but as a problem to be eliminated. She started following Genevieve around town, noting her routines and habits. From a distance, she would watch Genevieve buy groceries, exercise at the local park, or meet friends for coffee. Each observation only served to fuel Cordelia's irrational hatred. One afternoon, Cordelia followed Genevieve to a plus-size clothing boutique, watching through the window as Genevieve tried on wedding lingerie, a smile lighting up her face as she admired her reflection. Something snapped inside Cordelia. The sight of Genevieve's joy and self-acceptance was more than she could bear. It was at that moment that her plans began to take a more sinister turn. Cordelia's once immaculate home became a reflection of her mental state. Post-it notes covered in scrawled plans and ravings littered every surface. She neglected her appearance and her social obligations, becoming a recluse as she devoted herself entirely to her mission of saving Thaddeus in her more lucid moments. Cordelia was horrified by her own thoughts and actions. She would break down in tears, overwhelmed by guilt and confusion, but these moments of clarity were fleeting, quickly overshadowed by her all-consuming obsession. As her mental state deteriorated, Cordelia's behavior became increasingly erratic. She made anonymous calls to Genevieve's workplace, spreading vicious rumors about her competence as a teacher. She sent Thaddeus articles and statistics about the health risks of obesity, framing them as concerned motherly advice. Thaddeus, aware of his mother's escalating behavior but unable to grasp its full extent, made attempts to reason with her. He tried to explain his love for Genevieve, to make her understand that happiness and worth weren't determined by physical appearance, but his words fell on deaf ears. In Cordelia's distorted reality, she alone could see the truth, and it was her duty to act on it. As the day before the wedding dawned, Cordelia's obsession reached its peak. She had convinced herself that drastic action was necessary to save her son from a lifetime of misery. With a sense of grim determination, she began to formulate a plan that would alter the course of all their lives forever. The sun rose on what should have been a day of joyful anticipation in Meran. Instead, a palpable tension hung in the air, as if the town itself could sense the impending tragedy. Thaddeus and Genevieve, despite the stress of the past few months, were filled with excitement for their upcoming nuptials. They had decided to spend the day apart, adhering to the old tradition of not seeing each other before the wedding. Genevieve woke early, her heart light despite the conflicts with Cordelia. She had a full day planned, a final dress fitting, a manicure and pedicure with her bridesmaids, and a quiet dinner with her parents. As she went about her morning routine, she allowed herself to daydream about the life she and Thaddeus would build together. Across town, Thaddeus also rose with the sun, his mind racing with last-minute details and a lingering worry about his mother's state of mind. He had invited Cordelia to join him for breakfast, hoping for one last chance to reconcile before the wedding. As he waited at the local diner, nervously fidgeting with his coffee cup, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Cordelia, however, had no intention of meeting her son for breakfast. She had spent a sleepless night pacing her house, her mind filled with dark thoughts and desperate plans. In the early hours of the morning, she had come to a chilling decision. If she couldn't persuade Thaddeus to call off the wedding, she would have to take matters into her own hands. As the day progressed, Cordelia's behavior became increasingly erratic. She made a series of strange purchases at the local hardware store: rope, duct tape, and a set of sharp gardening shears. The cashier, who had known Cordelia for years, felt a sense of unease as he rang up her items, but chalked it up to wedding stress. Meanwhile, Genevieve was enjoying a relaxing day with her bridesmaids. As they laughed and chatted in the salon, she felt a sudden chill, as if someone had walked over her grave. Shaking off the feeling, she focused on the excitement of the day ahead, unaware of the danger that was drawing ever closer. By late afternoon, Cordelia had worked herself into a frenzy. She had convinced herself that eliminating Genevieve was the only way to save her son from a life of misery. With a frightening calm, she packed her purchases into her car and set off to find Genevieve. It didn't take long for Cordelia to track down her soon-to-be daughter-in-law. She found Genevieve leaving the salon, waving goodbye to her friends as she prepared to head home to get ready for dinner with her parents. Cordelia approached her, a brittle smile fixed on her face. Genevieve, surprised to see Cordelia but ever hopeful for reconciliation, greeted her warmly. Cordelia suggested they take a short drive to talk things over before the wedding, to clear the air between them. Despite her misgivings, Genevieve agreed, not wanting to enter her marriage with this conflict unresolved. As they drove out of town, Cordelia's demeanor changed. Her smile fell away, replaced by a look of cold determination. Genevieve, sensing the shift, began to feel uneasy. She asked Cordelia to turn back, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Cordelia drove them to a secluded area on the outskirts of town, a wooded spot where she and Edmund used to picnic in happier times. As she parked the car, Genevieve's unease turned to fear. She reached for her phone, only to find that there was no signal. What happened next was a blur of violence and terror. Cordelia, with a strength born of madness, overpowered Genevieve. The sounds of struggle echoed through the woods as Genevieve fought for her life. Cordelia, driven by her obsession and hatred, was relentless. In the end, it was Cordelia's gardening shears that dealt the fatal blow, silencing Genevieve's pleas and ending her life. As the reality of what she had done sank in, Cordelia stood over Genevieve's body, her mind reeling. The woods around her seemed to close in, the shadows deepening as the sun began to set. With shaking hands, she began the grim task of concealing her crime, her once pristine clothes now stained with evidence of her terrible deed. As darkness fell over Marin, two families waited anxiously for their loved ones to return home. Thaddeus, worried by his mother's absence at breakfast and Genevieve's failure to answer his calls, began to fear that his worst nightmares were coming true. Genevieve's parents, seated at a restaurant table with cooling meals and unanswered toasts, felt a growing sense of dread that something had gone terribly wrong. The details of Genevieve Plumer's final moments would later be pieced together by forensic experts and detectives, but the full horror of the event would never be fully known to anyone but Cordelia Gosling. What is known is that Cordelia had lured Genevieve to the wooded area under the pretense of reconciliation. The location, once a place of happy memories for Cordelia, became the setting for an unthinkable act of violence. Investigators would later find signs of a struggle spread over a large area, indicating that Genevieve had fought hard for her life. Cordelia, despite her age, had the advantage of surprise and a weapon. The gardening shears, chosen for their sharp blades and ease of use, became the instrument of Genevieve's death. The medical examiner would later determine that Genevieve suffered multiple stab wounds, with the fatal blow piercing her heart. In her final moments, Genevieve had called out for Thaddeus, a fact that seemed to enrage Cordelia even further. Neighbors living on the outskirts of the wooded area would later report hearing screams, but had dismissed them as animal sounds or rowdy teenagers. After the act, Cordelia's military precision took over. She had come prepared with cleaning supplies, garbage bags, and a change of clothes. She methodically cleaned the scene, bagging her blood-stained clothes and the murder weapon. She wrapped Genevieve's body in a tarp, struggling to move the larger woman's form. In a cruel twist of irony, it was Genevieve's size that presented the biggest challenge to Cordelia. Unable to move the body far, she resorted to covering it with leaves and branches, creating a hasty and ultimately ineffective hiding place. As she worked, Cordelia's mind raced. She fluctuated between moments of panic and eerie calm. In her distorted reality, she had done what was necessary to protect her son. She convinced herself that Thaddeus would understand, that he would thank her for saving him from a life of ridicule and hardship. With the physical evidence dealt with as best she could, Cordelia turned her attention to creating an alibi. She drove to a nearby town, disposing of the blood-stained clothes and murder weapon in various dumpsters along the way. She then went to a small cafe, making sure to engage the waiter in conversation and linger long enough to be remembered. As night fell, Cordelia returned home. She showered, scrubbing her skin raw as if she could wash away the horror of what she had done. She burned the clothes she had worn during the cleanup in her fireplace, watching as the last physical traces of her crime turned to ash. Meanwhile, Genevieve's body lay in the woods, the once vibrant woman now silent and still. The forest creatures, curious about this strange new addition to their home, began to disturb the hastily constructed cover. As a light rain began to fall, it slowly washed away some of Cordelia's attempts to hide her tracks. In town, concern was growing. Thaddeus, frantic with worry, had begun calling hospitals and police stations. Genevieve's parents, their fear mounting, had already reported their daughter missing. As the hours ticked by, the joy and anticipation that should have marked the eve of a wedding were replaced by a growing sense of dread and despair. Little did anyone know that the truth of what had happened in those woods would soon come to light, forever changing the lives of everyone in Marin and revealing the devastating consequences of unchecked prejudice and obsession. The dawn broke on what should have been Thaddeus and Genevieve's wedding day, but instead of celebration, Marin awoke to sirens and the grim faces of law enforcement. The idyllic town had become the center of a missing person investigation, with Genevieve Plumer's disappearance sending shockwaves through the community. Detective Elias Holloway, a seasoned investigator from the state police, took charge of the case. His first step was to interview Thaddeus, who was beside himself with worry and guilt. Thaddeus recounted the tensions with his mother, his voice breaking as he expressed his fear that Cordelia might have done something terrible. As the investigation unfolded, suspicion initially fell on Thaddeus himself. It wasn't uncommon, Detective Holloway knew, for a partner to be responsible in cases of disappearance. However, Thaddeus's genuine distress and solid alibi, he had been with his groomsmen all evening, quickly ruled him out as a suspect. Attention then turned to Cordelia. Her recent erratic behavior, combined with Thaddeus's concerns, made her a person of interest. When questioned, Cordelia presented a calm facade, providing a detailed account of her movements the previous day. She claimed to have spent the afternoon and evening in a neighboring town, even producing a receipt from a cafe as proof. However, inconsistencies in Cordelia's story began to emerge. The waiter at the cafe remembered her arriving much later than she claimed, and a neighbor reported seeing Cordelia's car return home late in the evening, contradicting her statement that she had been away all night. As the police dug deeper, they discovered Cordelia's recent unusual purchases at the hardware store. The cashier's statement about her strange behavior added another piece to the puzzle. A search warrant was obtained for the Goling residence, where investigators found traces of blood in Cordelia's car, despite her obvious attempts to clean it. The breakthrough came on the second day of the investigation. A hiker's dog, straying from the trail in the woods where Cordelia and Edmund used to picnic, discovered Genevieve's poorly hidden body. The grim find turned the missing person case into a homicide investigation. Forensic teams descended on the scene, meticulously documenting and collecting evidence. Despite Cordelia's efforts to clean up, she had left behind crucial clues: fibers from her clothing, a partial fingerprint on a discarded water bottle, and DNA evidence, all pointing to her presence at the crime scene. As the evidence mounted, Cordelia's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. During an intense interrogation, she finally broke down, confessing to the murder in a rambling monologue that revealed the depths of her obsession and prejudice. The confession sent shockwaves through Marin. Friends and neighbors, who had known Cordelia for years, struggled to reconcile the respected community member they thought they knew with the woman capable of such a heinous act. For Thaddeus, the revelation was devastating. The knowledge that his own mother had murdered the woman he loved, all because of her fat phobia and obsessive need for control, was almost too much to bear. He fell into a deep depression, blaming himself for not seeing the signs and protecting Genevieve. Genevieve's parents were inconsolable. Their daughter, who had touched so many lives with her kindness and passion for teaching, had been taken from them in the cruelest way. As Cordelia was taken into custody, the once picturesque town of Moran was left to grapple with the aftermath of a crime that had exposed the dark undercurrents running beneath its serene surface. In the weeks that followed Cordelia's arrest, the full extent of her descent into obsession and madness came to light. Investigators combing through her home discovered journals detailing her growing fixation on Genevieve's weight and her determination to end the relationship at any cost. The journals revealed a mind unraveling, filled with rambling entries that alternated between self-justification and moments of clarity where Cordelia seemed horrified by her own thoughts. Psychologists brought in to evaluate Cordelia diagnosed her with a severe personality disorder, exacerbated by unresolved grief over her husband's death and an unhealthy attachment to her son. One key piece of evidence came from Cordelia's computer. Despite her attempts to delete her search history, forensic experts were able to recover data showing her extensive research into ways to break up relationships and harmful anti-fat ideologies. The sheer volume of this material painted a picture of a woman consumed by her prejudices and fears. Witness testimonies also played a crucial role in building the case against Cordelia. Several of Thaddeus's ex-girlfriends came forward, revealing Cordelia's attempts to rekindle their relationships with Thaddeus. Their statements highlighted Cordelia's pattern of interference in her son's romantic life. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from Moran Elementary School's principal. She revealed that Cordelia had approached her just days before the murder, attempting to get Genevieve fired by making false accusations about her conduct with students. This showed the lengths to which Cordelia was willing to go to sabotage Genevieve's life. As the case progressed, the prosecution built a strong argument for premeditated murder. The hardware store purchases, the carefully chosen location, and the attempts to establish an alibi all pointed to a crime that was planned in advance, not a heat-of-the-moment act. Cordelia's defense team attempted to argue for a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, citing her mental health issues and an apparent break from reality. However, the evidence of premeditation made this defense difficult to maintain. Throughout the process, Thaddeus struggled to come to terms with his mother's actions. He provided key testimony about Cordelia's behavior in the months leading up to the murder, his voice barely above a whisper as he recounted the escalating tension and his own failure to recognize the danger Cordelia posed. The trial of Cordelia Goling concluded with a guilty verdict. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, her age and mental state taken into consideration to avoid the death penalty. As she was led from the courtroom, the once proud woman seemed small and broken, the weight of her actions finally sinking in. For Thaddeus, the end of the trial brought no closure. He was left to grapple with the dual tragedies of losing the woman he loved and the mother he thought he knew. In the months that followed, he threw himself into his work at the animal shelter, finding solace in caring for creatures who offered unconditional love.